Hello, everyone. Today we are talking about particles. Again, there's so many particles in Japanese, although today we're actually going to focus on a set of four that have pretty singular usages. They're not like our de or ni or ga that cover 16,000 different patterns depending on what else comes in the sentence. These are pretty standard. That being said, they've got some tricky spots to them, so hopefully we can navigate around those, and you can all leave today's lesson feeling like you have a good feel for what's going on. So with that in mind, let's jump in. We are focusing on this is a made up term. I don't think it's an official term, but we're going to call them sentence particles, or we could call them sentence ending particles, uh, mainly because they come at the end of sentences. And up until now, there's only been one other sentence ending particle that we have learned, which is ka. We use that to talk about questions, and that one was a very straight up, simple usage. It made sense. And we're going to jump into some that are less, they're both more defined and less defined at the same time. They make perfect sense within the world of Japanese, but they make less sense for many of us coming from a possibly a Western or non-Japanese approach. So with that in mind, let's jump in. The first one we're going to look at is ne. And before we talk about this anymore, some of you that have been listening to the events for a long time have heard me mention this, but it's so important that I'm going to spend a couple minutes talking about it again. And that is with particles. Particles are not words. They don't necessarily have a meaning attached to them. A meaning in the sense that that meaning can be represented by words in the sentence. Particles are functional in their base usage. They have a function, they have a purpose. I often say they have a job that they perform inside of the sentence. And especially with today's particles, I'm going to suggest that you shouldn't feel overly compelled to take these particles and translate them. It is extremely hard, if not in many cases impossible, to translate them. And on top of that, while the meaning, and we're going to look at ne first, is a very specific meaning, if you do go for a translation, there's not a specific translation for it, as you'll see. And so I'd like you to try and approach this as something that, unfortunately, when you're trying to write or understand an English sentence or French or whatever happens to be relative to the Japanese, you're probably not going to see ne in it. You're going to say, well, I see ne in the Japanese, but where is it in the English? And the answer is often it's not there because it performs a function and that function is not meaning based. Okay, enough with the theoretical. Let's jump into it. So, ne has two primary functions, primary jobs. One, the first one is much more common than the second. As you'll see, it's probably the one that you hear 95% of the time. The other one is, it's not there, but it's much less common. And the two functions, we're going to look at actual examples of this in just a minute. And I'm also going to take, for those of you that have already done this lesson in Renshu, I'm going to re-describe it in a completely different way. And probably one of the two ways might stick with you a bit better. So you can use it to ask for confirmation or as a rhetorical question. So let's compare that a little bit with what the ka did. Now the ka, again, was a function that said, hey, this thing that I'm showing you is a question. It doesn't technically, you can't point at ka in an English sentence and say, oh, the ka is represented by this word, necessarily. Sometimes there are words that come really close to it, but ka doesn't have that one-to-one translation, and ne is the same. However, in a sense, ka and ne are somewhat related. And if you haven't read this lesson, you probably haven't thought about that until now. Ka is a question, and so it's used for getting information that you probably don't already have. You know, sarcasm aside. However, with ne, you are using it, and the way that Renshu describes this is you're using it with information that you're pretty sure about, but you aren't positive. And I'm going to step in and expand that a little bit in just a few minutes. So it's for information that you're pretty sure is true. When I say pretty sure, I'm talking about anything from 60% up to 99.99999% true. But you aren't positive. And this is one way that you can approach the ne particle. Now, this is the most dangerous slide. If I guess it's not a PowerPoint, but I'm going to call it a slide. It's the most dangerous sentence here because it says you can think of ne as like right or isn't it in English. Now, this is both true and not true. Please note that here in Renshu, it's saying you can think of it as these two things. However, ne does not mean right. Ne does not mean isn't it. And I'll talk about that in a few more minutes once we talk about some examples, and then you'll see what I mean. But what ne is doing here is think about the purpose of ne, the purpose of right or isn't it in English. When do we use it? If you say, for example, this is great, right? You are pretty confident with what you just said. This is great. This is great, right? You're using that right to invite a response from the other person. In Renshu, a couple panels before, it said confirmation. That's what's happening here. It's the same thing with isn't it. You were saying something, making a statement. It might be a fact or an opinion, but you're making a statement and you're asking the other person to agree with you. You're saying A is good or A is bad, A is delicious, A is what we should do, right? Please, person listening to me, agree with the thing I just said. That's confirmation. That is what ne is doing. It is taking a statement and then saying, hey, person listening, respond to that. And I prefer if you agree with it. You're trying to get agreement out of the other person. So how could you possibly take everything I just said and boil it into, one or two words? It's really hard to do so, but that is the job. It is, if there was some of you are familiar with, especially in like language classes or kids classes, you might have some kind of conversational activity where you take some kind of object, let's say a potato. I don't know, it's the first thing that popped into my head. Say you have a potato, and it's the speaking potato. If you have the potato, you can speak. And this game that you play in your language class, you say something and then you hand the potato to the next person. And that's saying to them, hey, it's you should speak next. Ne is kind of like that potato. It is taking the direction of the conversation and pushing it to the next person, saying, hey, you say something. But ne is looking for confirmation. So it's not just you say something next, it's you say the thing that I just said. Agree with me. So let's look at a few examples, and then we're going to talk about it a bit more. So this first sentence is similar to what we've already learned. It's using the ka. So if you say, これはKao-chanの本ですか? You, the speaker, you're not sure if that's true or not. Like you're asking because you don't have that information yet. You're taking unknown information, trying to confirm it. However, with the second sentence, これはKao-chanの本ですね, you are making a statement. You're saying this information is right. I'm pretty sure it's right. You please respond and tell me that that's the case. You're looking for confirmation. And this often happens when you're dealing with information, like factual information, objective stuff. This you can't really have an opinion as to if this is Kal-chan's book or not. It either is or it isn't. And so in that sense, you are often looking for that confirmation about the information you're not quite sure about, but you could possibly be pretty sure. However, if you're talking about an opinion, so a lot of you know what my favorite Japanese food is because I mention it almost every event. It's curry. So if I said kare wa oishii desu ne, when I say that, am I asking for confirmation about my own opinion? No. I'm very clear that I love curry and I think it's delicious. However, it is asking for confirmation in the sense that I am asking the listener to respond and say something like this. Now, this is jumping into some casual, but saying, yeah, yeah, right? Yeah, it is delicious. Where they might even throw a ne of their own in there. Oishii ne. In this sense, they're agreeing, and you can also see that ne is almost like a dot, dot, dot. It's used to signal that the other person should continue talking. So ne is the rope pulling on the other person, saying so many metaphors today. Pulling on the other person, saying, "Hey, you, it's your turn to talk about this. Please say the same thing. Please agree with me." So before we continue, we're going to talk about that rhetorical question, half of ne. But before we do that, I want to jump back and look at this one more time. The one I called the dangerous panel. Now, you're not all native English speakers, but I presume most of you can speak English fairly well. Don't think about this too hard. Just give me a gut answer. How many of the sentences that you speak every day have one of these two things in it? Isn't it right? What percent of your sentences, excuse me, have this in it? Or if you want to think of it as a different way, how you might think how many times you say it a day. Do you say it 2 times? Do you say it 1,000? So I feel, and the answers that people are putting up confirm that isn't it and right are tied really closely to a person's style of speech in English. And especially, I think, I don't have the data to back this up, but I think with younger people, you have it used more. You also, I would say it's more of a casual thing. For example, I would presume that you're going to say, isn't it, right? Less often if you're talking in a business situation. And so these two words, or phrases rather, I think vary a lot with so many different situations in English. It's who you're talking to. Is it casual? Is it serious? Is it a fun conversation? Is it with your boss? Is it with your friends, with your family, with your teacher? It's going to vary a lot. However, with ne, ne is used by everyone in Japan. It's not only used by everyone, it is used all the time. And by that I mean, so someone earlier said, 5%. That person, if they are speaking natural, fluent Japanese, their ne is going to be all over the place. Same with everyone else. The level of usages between ne in Japanese and its supposed translations in English are night and day. In that ne is not casual in Japanese or polite. It's just there. It's just it's just a particle that has a function. And so I have seen people want to translate ne as right in every English sentence that they write. However, that's not true. That's not accurate because that's going to suggest that people that, for example, our person that said 5%, they say, well, I never use right, so I probably shouldn't use ne. That's not true. You're going to want to use ne when you're speaking Japanese. One thing it does, in addition to if you don't think too much about the functions of it, in the sense of confirming information that you're pretty sure is true, or asking them to agree with something you said when you say, kare wa oishii desu ne, it is a really good way to keep the conversation going because the ne invites a response from the listener. However, to give you a bit of comparison, let's go back to my curry sentence. This kare wa oishii desu, that sounds almost like you're saying it as an absolute statement and don't disagree with me or agree with me. Anything, I'm just saying it, it's there, it's done. It has a bit more of a sense of finality to it. It's not a conversation ender. It's just, it feels like there's a break at the end of that sentence. So if I was looking at you and I said, kare wa oishii desu, you the listener would think, okay, how should I respond to that? Because it feels like you're conversing, but you put out something that doesn't need a response. However, the ne really feels like it's a smooth transition from sentence to sentence. And so you're not going to be using ne all the time. But when you start looking at Japanese conversations more, you're going to see ne as a linking element of sorts. Something that keeps it going smoothly from one speaker to the next. So it's extremely useful. And you will see ne translated as right, and you can think to yourself, that's accurate. You just don't want it to always be translated like that, or always be translated as isn't it? Because in the end, ne can't be truly translated in a way that accurately represents how we use the language in Japanese and how we use it in English, both in terms of casualness, frequency, age levels, politeness, all that stuff. Okay, done with that. Let's keep going. So let me jump to where we were. Okay, this one is less common, but it still falls under the confirmation, kind of in the confirmation category. It's just you're confirming something without asking them to respond because you're like, I think I know this is right, right? And because it's a rhetorical question, it's often used in a situation where you might be critical of the other person. So let's take a look at these three sentences and you'll see what that means. Say you're a parent or a brother, anyone that's concerned with the well being of the person you're speaking to, and you're saying, have you done your homework? Shukudai o shimashita ka? That's a question. There's no intonation, there's no hint. You've done it right, or you haven't done it right, or you should have done it by now. There's none of that. This is just a straight up question. Have you done your homework? Yes or no? However, ne, remember, ne is used when you're either stating a fact that you're pretty sure is true, or you're making an opinion based statement, a subjective statement, and you're looking for the other person to agree with you. So if you say, shukudai o shimashita ne, you did your homework, right? Here, because you're using ne to say, I'm pretty sure this is true, then you're asking a question, but at the same time, you're saying, I know the answer. Or you are strongly implying that, okay, maybe I don't know if you've done it, but you should have done it, right? Shukudai o shimashita ne. And often when you hear hear this rhetorical form, you hear the ne being said, not always, but in the way I said it, 宿題をしましたね. It's more forceful. It's almost like you're poking them with your finger. Hey, hey, you did your homework, right? Hey. It's got that, kind of an attack. It's not a full out attack, but it's got a bit of an offensive feel to it. Not offensive bad, but offensive in the offensive defensive sense. You can even use it in the same opposite way by saying, you didn't do your homework, did you? Or, right? 宿題をしませんでしたね. So you might, this would fit very well for my son. He usually does his homework right when he gets home, but if he gets, and it takes him, 20, 30 minutes, but if he gets home and I'm not paying attention and 5 minutes later he's starting his video game, I'm thinking, wait, 5 minutes have gone by. He couldn't have done his homework. So I might say this if I was speaking to him in Japanese. 宿題をしませんでしたね. I wouldn't say it's sass exactly. It's just you're making, again, it's rhetorical in the sense that you kind of know the answer, so you're not expecting a response, but you are still asking the question. It's question and structure, but not question and meaning, because the meaning is I know what you've done or what you haven't done. And I'm forming it in a question to kind of make you feel bad about, whichever thing you happen to be talking about. Oh, and Renshu has, as an example, something similar to what I was describing. So that's ne. So as you've noticed, and a lot of grammar falls into this category. I think it's why a lot of people they start screaming when they think about studying grammar. Is grammar doesn't always have a very clear, I can take this meaning or I can take this usage and box it up and take that box and stick it into my head and I'm done. In the way that you can look at the word ringo and say, that means apple. Okay, I understand it. I'm finished with that word. There's nothing more to know about it. And especially with ne and some of the other ones we're going to talk about today, they definitely have that sense of, okay, I kind of get it, but I'm not quite sure if I can use it yet. And that's okay. That's totally okay. Especially with these particles, what you should be looking for now is when you see them in sentences, start to think about what they are trying to accomplish. What job are they trying to get done? And as a thought exercise, when you see ne, think about what the next person might say in response to that. If this sentence has ne in it, what do they want the next person to say? They want them to agree with them. Either confirm information or agree with an opinion. And then once you get a better feel for understanding it, you'll get closer to being able to use it yourself. Okay, let's jump into the second. This one I feel is a bit easier. Yo. You've seen yo all the time, all over the place. And I'm going to talk about the way that Renshu describes it. And then I'm going to give you a different way of thinking about it. And I think together those two will help you a lot. So it's a sentence ending particle, like before, and it changes the tone of the sentence. And by that, it's not actually changing the meaning of the sentence at all. It doesn't change the content of the sentence. Ne and ka are functional in that they're trying to get something from the listener, and they're also hinting at what you believe about. You're like, I'm not sure about this information. I'm pretty sure, but I'm not 100%. Yo isn't changing the information that you have. Instead, let's take a look at this. これは美味しいですよ。食べてください. This is delicious. Please eat it. What this yo is doing is it's taking the sentence and it's adding a little bit of energy to it. It's making it stronger. Now it's not 16 exclamation points making it stronger. It's not all caps making it stronger. It's making it a little bit stronger. And let's look at, now this is one of those ones where for the sake of the explanation, we're going to give you some examples of how one might translate it if they really wanted to translate yo. And so you could say, let me tell you, this is delicious. But do we say that? Not really. Yo, again, is so common in Japanese, but if we try and bring it into English, it starts to sound really strange. Or I assure you this is delicious. We don't typically say that. And so, how many of you say I assure you or let me tell you? I bet the number is less than 10%, maybe 5%, maybe 1%. Yo, however, is extremely common in Japanese. Very, very common. You can kind of think of it as an exclamation point, but even that is not the most accurate way of describing it. Because think about this, you may like this, you may dislike it, you may feel indifferent about it, but some people, when they type, they use lots of exclamation points. Some people, when they type, they use no exclamation points. And some people, have a mix. And I know there's some people that will look at someone typing exclamation points at the end of every sentence and they think, well, what's all that energy? What's going on over there? That's not really, I don't care for that way of writing. Other people love it. And there's no value judgments being made here. But you shouldn't think of it as in, I prefer to have I'm going to say a relaxed style of speaking that's not too punchy. I'm not going to use yo. That would be inaccurate. Most people use yo in Japanese. It is ever so slightly more casual than polite. I wouldn't call it a casual particle, but it is slightly more casual in the sense that you probably wouldn't use it if you were responding to, say, something your boss said. Because it does, in the same way that you might not use an exclamation point in certain situations, or you might not raise your voice instead of an exclamation point if you were talking to your boss. You would have maybe a more normal, relaxed cadence in the way that you speak. But like I noted, this is very common in Japanese. And the way I have described it in other situations is this is taking the strength level of the sentence and bumping it up by 1. Same content, same meaning, but you're making it a little stronger. If you were making a web page, or writing an email, you might make it a little bit more bold. Not super bold, but a little bit thicker. The lines would be a little bit thicker than the word next to it to say, hey, this is a bit more important. Not more important. I feel this a bit more strongly than I do everything else I said. But you'll see it used all the time. Ne and yo, you can't escape them. It's not a this is the kind of person I am, I'm going to use yo, in the same way that someone else said, I say, isn't it, or I say right all the time. It's not a choice that you make. Basically, everyone is going to have spots for using yo and ne in their everyday conversations. And interestingly, you'll see them mixed together sometimes. They nay That's a really good question, and let me talk about what's on the screen first and then pivot back to that because they're kind of related. You do see them coming together often. It's not a requisite by any means, but remember, nay is asking for a confirmation from someone. Ne is what the speaker is saying to get the listener to say something back. And yo is taking something that is a regular level strength sentence and making it a little bit stronger. So let's go with that. Hey, you didn't do your homework, did you? Or you didn't do your homework, right? Sentence that we had before. 宿題をしませんでしたね. And if you in fact had done your homework, you wouldn't want to say, think about how you'd answer in English. If your mother or father or teacher said, you didn't do your homework, did you? And you had done it. How would you answer? Would you say, I did my homework? Or would you say, I did my homework, or I did do it? You know, you'd add a little bit of extra emphasis to it. And that's where that yo jumps in, is adding a bit of punch to it, a bit of energy. You also see it with so this was the information confirmation one that we're talking about. You also see it with the opinion-based one. So, for example, someone might see, I'm typing this out. If you were saying, man, this is delicious, これ美味しいですね, and someone might respond, 美味しいよ, yeah, it is delicious. And they're not just agreeing with you, they're agreeing with you and they're bumping it up a little bit. And you've probably even heard this. You could take that instead of 美味しいよ. Sometimes you might hear this. Actually, let me stop. Maybe let's break that. Let's start a new conversation. You can even do this. これは美味しいですよね. And the yo ne as a pair is also extremely common. Remember, all the yo does is make it a bit stronger. Ne is asking for confirmation. So you're saying, man, this is really, like, it almost has like a really feel to it. This is delicious, right? And so you're making your this is delicious statement stronger, and you're asking the other person to respond back to you. Yo is just a little bit of strengthening. Ne is asking them to respond. And as it's almost, let me give you a full example of completely legitimate Japanese, but might make you think, is this even a sentence? Let's see, 1 second. Have we actually, okay, never mind. Okay. Someone says, この試験は難しいですね. This test is hard, right? This test is hard. And as you might remember back when we learned basic questions and answers, and you've probably seen this in your book, one of the basic ways of answering something is like, はい、そうです. Yes, that is, so is kind of a replacement for the sentence before. Yes, that's true. And the casual form of des is da. So someone can say, この試験は難しいですね. This test is difficult, right? And the other person says, yeah, that's true. So da. But then they say ne. So why did they say ne? You just said something and asked them for confirmation. Then they are agreeing with you. They're saying, yes, that's true. Ne. Wait, what are they asking you to confirm again? And this still happens though. Again, it almost just feels like glue to continue the conversation on its way. And you might even have a third person say this. They might drop the so altogether and just put the da in there, and then yo, because they're adding some emphasis to it, and then the ne. だよね. And for people that don't have each of these particles separated out in their heads, you've probably heard this in Japanese or read or heard this in anime or read this in manga, and you thought "dayone," what what word? I can't look that up. That's not a word, but they just said it. How could it possibly be three separate words and only be three characters? And by the way, there's also a hidden soul that they just dropped out of the sentence because it's understood in context. So I'm not suggesting you should grab all these smaller examples and say, "Oh, I understand these perfectly now." But when you start to see yo and ne interspersed in phrases and sentences, you can start to think a little bit more. Okay, what's that single character doing here? That yo's adding emphasis. The ne is asking for confirmation, or it's continuing the conversation a bit. So yeah, if someone responds with ne, it's kind of pushing you to say something more. Exactly. And sometimes you'll hear someone say ne, ne. And there's your response. Your response is saying ne again. And it seems comical to us because you think, what's the purpose of this conversation? Like, why are they spending their time on this earth saying nay back to each other? But language, especially spoken language, is not efficient. And the nay helps again the flow of the conversation, and it brings the other person in or back into the conversation. It keeps things going. So yeah, I think of nay as something that, put another way, is saying this conversation's not over. This line of thought is not over. Let's keep it going. Keep it going because I need you to confirm this or agree with this or just keep talking about it. You've just got that nay in there saying, hey, come on, guys, move it on. Let's keep going. Keep going. That's a different nay, but yes. Nay, nay. If you're trying to, or just nay, nay. If you're trying to get someone's attention. So different word, I believe. I wouldn't call that a particle, but yes, that's definitely common to hear that. Good question. Okay, I said this was going to be a short lesson, but it's actually turning out to be the full thing. We still have two more to do, so let's continue. So these two are, in comparison to the ones we just did, used 1/100th of the time, a fraction of the time of yo and ne. But in terms of where they go in sentences, it's basically the same spot, and so we felt it was worthwhile bringing these up. Wa is very similar to yo in terms of what it accomplishes. It's that extra emphasis. It makes it a little bit stronger, a bit more assertive, as Renshu was noting. Now, what you've possibly heard before is wa. Some people will call it wa is used by females. That's not right. That's not completely right. A few things. It is not, I'm female, so I should use wa. That's not true. There's a huge number of female speakers I know that I've never heard them say wa. In addition, I have known male speakers that use wa. I think there's a few different things at play here. I think that it's a bit less common and modern. When I say modern, I mean the last 10, 15, 20 years. I feel like it's not quite as common as maybe as it used to be, the wa. I don't have data to back that up. It's just kind of a feeling I have. And so you don't hear it as often to begin with. When you do hear it, it tends to be people that identify as female. However, it is not restricted to that. Now, this one man that I knew back when I lived in a different place in Japan, he used it quite frequently. And I identified fully as male. However, I would say his manner of speech was slightly softer than if you had whatever this means, baseline male, baseline average of how males speak in Japan. His way of speaking was a bit softer. And so that softness kind of matched well with wa. So it feels softer than yo a bit. And culturally, traditionally, females have tended to have a softer way of saying things, a softer voice and whatnot. I'm not suggesting that should be the way or is the way now, but just historically. So you saw wa being used or and still used more exclusively, not exclusively, more often by women. But again, it's not a I identify as female, I should use it, or I identify as male, I should not use it. It's probably one of those ones that you should just be aware. If you see wa, think yo. And if you are really into experimenting with language, then yeah, give it a shot. But otherwise, you probably will never need to use this unless you get far advanced enough in your speaking level that you have been exposed to enough speakers to say this is the kind of level or style of speaking that works for me. Then you can choose whether or not you actually want to use wa. So that's wa. But otherwise, I think I mentioned this, but just in case I didn't, it is typically used with the casual form. So you probably would not hear this. Oishi desu wa. That sounds a bit off. Instead, oishi wa would sound like the softer version of oishi yo. And just as a quick example, here's one that shows yo and wa. And in terms of function, what they are accomplishing in the sentence, you can consider these as the same. The top one is not pushed in one gender or the other. It's not softer or stronger. It's just it is. And then the bottom one does have a slightly more feminine / softer feel to it. Okay, let's wrap things up with the last one. This one you hear, I'd say you hear this one more than wa. You can hear it's not the opposite. They both mean the same thing. They both mean I'm making this stronger. It's just wa to me sounds softer, not weaker. Softer in terms of how to put this intensity of your speaking. Like if you go with super stereotypical voices and like there's that idea of a man's man kind of thing that they speak like this and you would think of that as an intense voice, for example. And then you have for example a historical stereotypical female voice that speaks very very lightly and softly. I mean it not that the content is soft or weak, but just their way of speaking is softer. um it is closer to that. And the more you hear it, when you see characters in anime, for example using wa, you'll probably start to notice which ones are using it and which ones aren't, and link that to their character, their personality, the way they use their voice, and you might start to see more connections in that sense. Okay, last one is na. You can hear it as the shortened form na. You can also hear it as na. I feel like na is probably more common, so that's the one we have here. It is a casual particle, straight up casual. You're not going to use this in polite or formal conversations. And it's actually it's going to mention this in a second. It's usually used, it's attached not to, for example, okay, here's a super simple, I'm not sure how often we would say this is a TV, but これはテレビです. Now this one, You could possibly, I could see situations where you say this is a TV. For example, you're trying to show, maybe they don't believe it's a TV. It doesn't look like a TV, it looks like a pumpkin, but it's actually a TV. And you're like, hey, this is a TV. You're emphasizing what you're saying. And that would make sense. Na is also an emphasis particle. It is emphasizing it, but you don't use it to emphasize a fact or information, factual information. You use it to emphasize usually emotions. And when I say emotion, I mean feelings, opinions about some things, but things that bring out an emotional reaction from you. And it is usually when you are speaking to yourself, not in the sense of you're talking to yourself, um, as in the as in we're going back to English. We're saying, "Oh, I don't talk to myself, so I would never use this." It's when you're speaking to no one in particular. When you're speaking without the expectation of a reaction, you're just kind of like saying it out, out there. And so I would be totally okay using this with my wife next to me, even knowing that my wife is next to me. It's just I'm not speaking to her if I use this. I'm just kind of speaking out. And so take a look at these two emotionally charged emotion in one sense. That's a good question. I wouldn't use this because this one isn't for questions. Um, but in the sense of talking to yourself, yes. This one's not for questions. This one's for statements, opinionated statements. So, for example, if someone is being loud, you could say, where'd you go? Where's my sentence? There we go. あの人はうるさいな. Or you could shorten and just say, うるさいな. You're just like, they're noisy. But you're not saying it to them. You're just saying it out there. Maybe someone's listening. Maybe you want someone to listen, but you're not speaking to them. Or, 食べたいな. I'm hungry. I want to eat. 食べたいな. 美味しいな. Oh, this is good. But compared to ne, which is saying, hey, listen to me, respond to me, this one you're just saying words out into the ether. You're just tossing them out there. Real fast, if you are talking to yourself, and this is outside the lessons, I'm just going to mention this real fast. If you're talking to yourself and asking a question, there's a particle, I guess you can call it a particle, it's called kana, which is, now that I think about it, I just made this connection in my head, is probably ka, the question particle, and na, the particle we're talking about now, just the shortened form of it. But usually in dictionaries, and when you hear it introduced, you'll hear it mentioned as kana, as a set. But I'm now willing to wager a small amount of money saying that this is probably a binding of the ka question particle and na, this self-reflective, talking to yourself, emphasis style particle. Anyway, that brings us to the end of the lesson, and a lot of these don't feel necessary in the survival sense of the language. Like if I don't understand these, I won't be able to live. I won't be able to ask for a room or order something at a restaurant or make a purchase at a convenience store. That's true. However, these are essential spices, like the ones that go on KFC. They're spices that you really need to make your Japanese fluent, and bring a level of what's the word? Bring a level of naturalness to your conversations. Are going to make it easier for other people to keep talking to you. So I hope you have a better feel for these, slightly better, and you're able to now identify these when they pop up in sentences and have a slightly better feel for what they're doing, even if there's no English in the sentence linking to that particle. This video will be up on Renshu if you need to see it, and I hope you join us next time. Thank you.